A warm welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Layo Olarinde. Here's what's coming up on the program this week. The US makes its strongest public criticism yet of Israel's handling of the war, with Secretary of State Antony Blinken calling on Israel to do more in protecting civilians. The UK and Rwanda signed an asylum treaty that will send asylum seekers to the African nation. Plus, a conversation with Dr. Joe Unjaaba, an advisory council member on the Africa Integration think tank. He joins us from Houston, Texas. Diplomatic Channel begins right now with a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles.
Russian President Vladimir Putin visited Abu Dhabi, UAE, the first leg of his Blitz Gulf tour. The host nation staged lavish welcome ceremony with jets flying over the city, leaving contrails and colors of Russian flag. Camel and horse cavalry guards lined the route of Putin's motorcade from the airport to presidential palace. Foot soldiers greeted the Russian leader with drum beats and shouts overlaid with artillery salute. Meeting with United Arab Emirates President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Russian President Vladimir Putin says relations between Russia and the UAE are at an unprecedented high. Both leaders discussed the situation in Ukraine and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Russia and the UAE cooperate in OPEC Plus and are involved in major oil and gas projects.
Объединенные Арабские Эмираты вносят огромный вклад в стабилизацию ситуации в мире, будучи.
After departing the UAE, President Putin landed in Saudi Arabia for hastily arranged talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on oil, Gaza, and Ukraine. In introductory remarks shown on Russian television, Mr. Putin thanked the Crown Prince for his invitation, saying he had originally expected MBS to visit Moscow, but there were changes to plans. President Putin's delegation included top oil, economy, foreign affairs, space and nuclear energy officials. The trip to Riyadh for his first face-to-face talks with MBS since October 2019, only days after a key OPEC Plus meeting was delayed, appeared hastily arranged. Putin's last visit to the region was in July 2022 when he met Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in Iran. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Swedish Defense Minister Pal Johnson have signed a defense cooperation agreement. The agreement comes as the Nordic country strengthens military alliances as it waits for approval from Turkey and Hungary to join NATO. During the meeting, Austin said both countries will continue to learn from each other, building defense capabilities and strengthening interoperability.
We look forward to learning from each other as we continue to build our defense capabilities together and to strengthen our interoperability. Sweden has shown outstanding leadership in supporting Ukraine as it fights Russian aggression, including providing $2.7 billion in security and humanitarian assistance.
The US has provided considerable political and military support during our process also to join NATO. Your swift political ratification and support has really been invaluable. So thank you so much also for that.
Hi, Vanessa. Nice to see you.
Australia and neighboring Papua New Guinea have signed a bilateral security agreement that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and counterpart James Marape say shows the closeness of the two nations. The deal is designed to bolster Papua New Guinea's internal security through more assistance in policing, defense and the judiciary as the Pacific Island's largest nation seeks to develop its economy.
Okay.
This security agreement is a natural progression in our security partnership. It builds on our comprehensive strategic and economic partnership. It reinforces our mutual respect for each other's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity.
Our major foreign policy as friends to all enemies to none remains, and it's never picking a side. We have specific aspects of relations with every nation we choose to, with Australia, with USA. Those are the relationships we picked, and it's never at the expense of our relationships elsewhere.
Amid strategic competition between China and the United States in the region, PNG signed a defense deal with the United States in May to upgrade its military bases and is also boosting trade ties with China.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has invoked a rarely used clause in the UN Charter and made an urgent appeal for a ceasefire to be declared in Gaza. He called for the Security Council to help avert a humanitarian catastrophe and stressed that the situation is deteriorating rapidly. Well, after this, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also called on Israel to do more in protecting civilians in Gaza.
Of all the issues that you discussed.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there's a gap between Israel's intent to protect civilians and the results on the ground in Gaza.
Embeds itself with civilians, but again, Israel has an obligation to do everything.
Speaking during a joint news conference with British Foreign Secretary David Cameron, Mr. Blinken says it remains imperative that Israel put a premium on safeguarding civilians, adding that Washington talks to Israel on a regular basis about the protection of civilian lives.
The Israelis have been evacuating neighborhoods instead of entire cities, so focusing in on a much more deliberate way on those who may be in harm's way as they conduct the campaign against Hamas, establishing some deconfliction areas, some safe areas that people can go to, where they can be safe from being in the line of fire, and having a more narrowly focused area of where this military operation is actually being conducted. Having said that, as we stand here almost a week into this campaign in the South after the end of the humanitarian pause, it is imperative, it remains imperative that Israel put a premium on civilian protection. And there does remain a gap between exactly what I said when I was there, the intent to protect civilians, and the actual results that we're seeing on the ground. We continue to recognize the extraordinary difficulty of this task, as Israel is dealing with a terrorist adversary that intentionally embeds itself with civilians. But again, Israel has an obligation to do everything possible to put a premium on protecting civilians and maximizing humanitarian assistance.
In a rare move, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres wrote to the President of Security Council to demand action and to avert a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, invoking Article 99 of the UN Charter for the first time since he became UN Secretary General in 2017. This was echoed by spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric, expressing grave concerns over the scale of the loss of human lives in Gaza and Israel.
Given the scale of the loss of human life in Gaza and in Israel in such a short amount of time, the Secretary General has today delivered a letter to the President of the Security Council invoking Article 99 of the Charter of the United Nations. This is the first time that Antonio Guterres has done this since he became Secretary General in 2017. Article 99 states, and I quote, that the Secretary General may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter in his opinion that may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. In the letter, which has been shared with you, the Secretary General urges the members of the Security Council to press to avert a humanitarian catastrophe, and he appeals for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared.
To diplomatic relations, Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet has made his first trip to neighboring Vietnam in a bid to boost ties. The leader, who took office in August this year, was welcomed by his Vietnamese counterpart, Pham Minh Chinh, at the presidential palace in capital Hanoi, where talks between both delegations were later held. The two sides signed memorandums of understanding in the fields of trade, diplomacy, technology and science. Vietnam and Cambodia established diplomatic relations in 1967, with two-way trade totaling $11 billion in 2022. Vietnam is currently the largest investor in Cambodia in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, with a total registered capital of nearly $3 billion in 205 projects. Over in Australia, the government has announced plans to halve migration intake within 2 years in an attempt to fix the country's broken immigration system. Under the new policies, international students would need to secure higher ratings on English tests, and there would be more scrutiny on a student's second visa application that would prolong their stay. Visa rules for low-skilled workers will also be tightened under the new plan.
It's not just about this moment and the experience of migration our country is having at this time. This is about Australia's future. We've got some really big national challenges that we face as a country. So we've put forward measures here that will help us bring net overseas migration back to normal in a very short time frame. They're very significant measures that we're taking here. Things like increasing the English language requirements for students, making sure that the students who are coming here are going to be able to study and going to be able to thrive in our labour market.
The decision comes after net immigration was expected to have peaked at a record 510,000 in 2022-2023. However, it aims to slash the annual intake to 250,000, roughly in line with the pre-pandemic levels by June 2025.
Britain has signed a new treaty with Rwanda, which it says would overcome a court decision blocking its plan to deport asylum seekers to the East African nation, a ruling that dealt a huge blow to the government's immigration policy.
Britain signed a new treaty with Rwanda on Tuesday, which it said would overcome a court decision blocking its plan to deport asylum seekers to the East African country, a ruling that dealt a huge blow to the government's immigration policy. Britain's Interior Minister James Cleverly signed a new asylum treaty with Rwanda, an attempt to overcome a UK Supreme Court decision to block the government's controversial policy of sending asylum seekers to the East African country. The court ruled last month that Britain's plan to send tens of thousands of asylum seekers arriving on its shores without permission to Rwanda would violate international human rights laws enshrined in domestic legislation. Britain wants to deter migrants crossing the English Channel from Europe in small boats as part of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's immigration reforms ahead of an expected general election next year. The new treaty will include an agreement that Rwanda would not expel asylum seekers to a country where their life or freedom would be threatened, one of the court's major concerns. There will also be a monitoring committee to enable individuals to lodge confidential complaints directly to them, and a new appeal body made up of judges from around the world.
The treaty that we signed today builds on that joint work. It takes the positive professional attitude that you and your government display and allies it with the work that the UK is doing to ensure that we break the business model of those evil people smuggling gangs. We want to make sure that people can live in safety and prosperity.
The treaty we are signing, to have just signed today, will reinforce the mutually beneficial framework for cooperation that we have developed. It will re-emphasize in a binding manner already existing commitments that address the concerns raised in the legal process about the protection of asylum seekers.
Joining us now is Dr. Joe Unjaaba. He's the Advisory Council member on the African Integration Think Tank. Thank you so much for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Greetings, Layo. Greetings, televiewers. Happy to be in this panel to share some global views.
Indeed. Let's begin with your thoughts. What do you make of this asylum treaty that has been signed between the UK and Rwanda?
Yes, the treaty is a win-win for both the UK and the Rwandan administration. For it is principally between two people who are very versed with what it means to be displaced from your community, from your home place, either forcefully or because of circumstances. President Kagame has been an asylee in Uganda for 30 years, and the Prime Minister of UK was also in the East Africa and was moved to this has an experience about what it means to be displaced from a community.
Now, let's talk about Rwanda. I mean, why it has agreed to receive these asylum seekers. But do you think it has the capacity to do this? Although the government has said, you know, it's ready to go on with this plan with the UK. But then we have the issue of human rights, with agencies saying they're weary of the country's track record.
Yeah, I mean, generally, a lot of people don't know that Africa has a lot of refugees. There are 30 million refugees in the world. Africa happens to be sheltering 85% of the refugees in the world. So Rwanda has the capacity, because it's not the first time that they are accommodating people who have been persecuted from their community. And secondly, they have the best public system in Africa. The place is neat. The country is well structured as concerns their public policies and the society. In 2017, Rwanda accommodated 4,000 refugees from Israel who were from Eritrea and South Sudan. They happened to find themselves in Israel, but Israel was looking for a second country where they could go and their skills could improve, where they can have adequate settlement. There was no cases of human rights abuse with those 4,000 asylees. Secondly, in 2019, 900 asylum seekers who were from Libya, through the United Nations Human Rights Commission and the African Union, were also accommodated in Rwanda. So Rwanda has a lot of experience in accommodating people who are in such hurting situations, how they can find a safe haven to rebuild their lives. Those 900 Libyans were later, half of them were later resettled in Sweden, Canada, Norway, France, Belgium. And to date, no cases of human rights violations were reported. President Kagame himself is a refugee, was a refugee in Uganda for 30 years. So he himself knows what it means to be displaced from their community because of political or economic reasons.
Finally, Dr. Joe Unjaaba, Now that the treaty has been signed, do you see, this achieving the aim of deterring illegal migration? And I'm asking this, to look at the root problem, illegal migration. I mean, thousands of Africans keep trooping dangerously into the Mediterranean, all just to reach Europe.
There's nothing bad for people to move from one place to other. Migration has always been something which is of old, just like in the Bible, where we hear of Jesus moving to Egypt for refuge. And so it has been part of life. Abraham moving from Ur to the land of Canaan. So movement has always been part of human life. But what we are trying to say is that in the present situation of the world, the global situation in the world, I try to bring this example that if somebody has a company called the World Bank, how will you assess that company's performance in Africa, where money is given for development and you cannot really see it? So what we are advocating for the international community is to see that there are good structures in place for development to be carried out globally. Not that things will be one-sided. I was discussing with some friends the other time. I said, why is it that it is easy for some countries to go to China and manufacture and set up companies to manufacture goods? Those raw materials are even coming from Africa, but they are unable to set similar structures and factories in Africa to manufacture those goods, whether it's the shirts, whether it's cell phones, or whatever gadgets. Africa has the capacity to set up factories, to accommodate factories, and also have labor to accommodate those factories, which can manufacture things and improve on its financial situation. What we see now, the trend of things happening in West Africa, especially with Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, it is surprising to see that the military took. Yeah, I'm not really advocating for military style of government, but it is surprising to see that the military style of government is, within the short time which those administrators came into place, they have introduced far more rapid improvement in development of those nations than when the civilians were there. Which means, is it that the civilian regimes were finding it difficult to think well, or there were some treaties which were signed by those civilian leaders, which were not to the benefit of their local community? So, if the world is pressing on good governance, if the world is pressing on better development in Africa and other developing world, they should also be looking about those things. And it is time for the community, the local population, to hold also the international community into account, to say, is it that they are being deceived? Why is it that a civilian regime will sign a treaty which is not for the benefit and the growth of the local community, but yet they will be accusing such countries or companies of being poor, of which it is the treaties that were signed? So there are many factors which come into place for people to move for economic reasons or political reasons. They will always be there. But what we are calling for is that people should be truthful to themselves, especially when they talk about they want to see transparency, good governance, honesty. Good governance, transparency, honesty, integrity, good structures, good economic or robust economic activities. All those things are comprehensive. They should not be treating them in parts, in bit by bit. No, they are all comprehensive. If something it is not working, the international community should stand and also tell those people that those things are not working. It's not a matter of trying to choose a few a handful of people to place them financially to the detriment of the local community or the country as a whole.
All right. We'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Joe Unjaaba. Thank you so much for your contributions on Diplomatic Channel today.
Thank you.
And this is where we end the program this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde. Do join me again next time.